In this episode of Flick Connection, we're going to be talking about a bunch of the most stunningly underrated movies you can currently catch on Netflix. Now, there are a few new releases in the mix, and even though we bookend this list with two absolutely brutal action movies, the list is pretty varied. We've got a wide range of genres to choose from, so I've got a little something for everybody, almost everybody. Thanks to Factor for sponsoring this video. My bottom pick on this list is one of the newer releases. It's actually from Indonesia. It's titled The Shadow Strays. Now don't worry if you don't do subtitles, they've got a decent dubbed version that's plenty fun to watch. But as I said, this is a brutal action movie done in the vein of The Raid. If you didn't know, The Raid also comes from Indonesia. And those movies have inspired a pretty decent run of brutal action movies just like this. Movies like Headshot and The Night Comes For Us. The Shadow Strays is just kind of the latest entry into this excessively violent martial arts genre. And even though The Shadow Strays is from Indonesia, it feels kind of like a live-action anime. You're dealing with this like elite force of assassins. There's a little bit of a futuristic or sci-fi slant, just a little bit. It's not nearly as well crafted as the Raid movies, but if you do dig this genre, The Shadow Strays is a badass entry that Netflix just added last month. Now, I've got another action movie, but like I said, it's underrated, and then I've got just an art house film that's going to blow your mind. But believe it or not, Jackie Chan makes the list with one of his more recent and most underrated movies. It's titled The Foreigner. Now, on the surface, there's nothing too unique about this movie. It's kind of a boilerplate revenge flick, except it's the most brutal action movie Jackie Chan's maybe ever done. Now, he's obviously famous for some of the most legendary stunts in movie history. There are some great ones in this movie, but the movie's got a much, much harder edge than Jackie Chan movies typically do. In fact, there's really no levity to this at all. And it's an interesting change of pace for him. He does a great job in the role. Obviously, the action's incredible in this movie, but it works well. It's interesting to see him do a movie like this that's got a little bit more of like a John Wick edge to it, whereas a lot of his other stuff is action-packed, but also really funny and fun to watch. The Foreigner is anything but fun. Well, some of the action's fun. It's Jackie Chan. Director Alejandro Iñárritu makes the list. He's most famous for The Revenant, Birdman, and Babel, but he did a artsy movie for Netflix just about 2 years ago that visually is one of the most stunning movies on this list. It's titled Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths. Now, in this movie, you go kind of on a psychedelic journey with an older man. He doesn't take psychedelics, at least not that I remember, but he goes on this like dreamscape type experience that kind of takes him back through different moments in his life, and he experiences them in this really, again, just stunning way. The filmmaking here is just absolutely incredible, and believe it or not, the movie actually makes a bit of sense. You know, it's not just total chaos, but you really do need to be in the mood for an art film with this one. The movie's not going to explain anything to you, really, at all, but you could actually potentially pick up a lot from this movie just from the visual presentation. Again, it's absolutely beautiful, and this movie is a good example of something Netflix gets right occasionally. They let a director like him just do what they want. And yes, this movie's not a masterpiece, but it's still just an incredibly interesting flick that just probably would not exist if Netflix didn't, you know, let directors like him do what they want. Now, even though Iñárritu is an award-winning director, I ranked a Megan Fox movie above his film. Just let me explain why I put Till Death where I did on the list. This is kind of like a mix between a classic Alfred Hitchcock-style thriller and a Lifetime original movie. Now, I realize those two things are on completely opposite ends of the spectrum, but Till Death honestly lands somewhere in the middle. It's cheesy, a bit pulpy, but it's also got a hard edge to it and has some excellent, and I mean truly excellent, thriller elements. Kind of similar to the movie Gerald's Game. She ends up handcuffed to a dead man. But there are some other men on their way to finish the job. She's got to hide somewhere in this house that is just out in the freezing cold. She literally has nowhere to go. And there are at least 2 men trying to kill her. And that's really all you need to know. Megan Fox does an excellent job. There's actually not much dialogue in this movie at all. She's basically running and hiding the entire time, and it works, again, as kind of a classic thriller, again, with that, you know, cheesy Lifetime original movie. There's a whiff of it in there, okay? It's not all over the place, but there's a strong whiff of it. The late great Tony Scott makes the list with, I think, easily his most underrated movie, even though it stars Brad Pitt and Robert Redford in Spy Game.
Is it hard? Is what hard? To take a life.
For those who don't remember, Tony Scott directed movies like the original Top Gun, Crimson Tide, and then he would later go on to do movies like Man on Fire and Unstoppable, which had this really fast, frenetic editing style. The movie Domino with Keira Knightley, I love that flick. Even though it's not a great one, I love it. But that fast-paced filmmaking style that he would eventually become very well known for, it really stands out as a Tony Scott style. This is the first movie I remember really seeing it come to life, and it does. It's got an incredible style to it. I would say if you like Man on Fire, this is almost as good of a flick, but it's just an excellent spy movie, and a very realistic spy movie as well. This is not James Bond. This is what actual spycraft looks like, and it's also kind of interesting, at least to me, that Robert Redford and Brad Pitt are in this movie together. There's a lot of similarities in their careers and styles. They're just from different generations, and so the casting makes perfect sense for this as well. But then I've got a brand new thriller that just got added last month, and it's from producer Sam Raimi. Now, I know most of you know the name Sam Raimi, but he's most famous for the Evil Dead movies and the original Spider-Man, but he's also done some incredible thrillers like A Simple Plan. Now, while he did not direct Don't Move, his fingerprints are on it a bit. It feels a bit like a Sam Raimi movie, and honestly feels a little bit like a cheesy Netflix movie at times, but I really enjoyed this flick. Now, I'll even agree that just like the Lifetime Network, I don't even know if the Lifetime Network still exists. I don't know why I mentioned it twice in one video, but just like that network, Netflix has probably too many movies where serial killers are trying to kill women. There's just a lot of them. This is another one, but I really enjoyed it. It's got an interesting twist. The main character gets drugged very early on in the movie. That's kind of the setup, and then she begins to lose her facilities. Like, she can't walk, her fingers go numb, she can't speak, and gets completely paralyzed fairly early on in this movie, and spends almost the entire movie in this state. And they did a killer job making that work. Now, the movie is a little bit slow-paced. Again, you're dealing with a main character who is frozen stiff, basically. And even though some things go a bit over the top, it all stays relatively well grounded, while also it goes over the top in a Sam Raimi way, but just enough to keep it entertaining. It never really lost me, and I thought it was just an exciting thrill ride with a slightly different twist, and then ultimately, I think it was fairly well written as well. Now, speaking of excellent writing, my next pick on this list is titled Filth. It's based on a book by the same name, and the book is from the same author as Trainspotting, and Filth and Trainspotting both share some very similar flavors. Obviously, some of that is from the writing directly, but also in the way that those two movies are directed. They've got a very similar vibe at times, meaning if you're partial to Trainspotting, you need to see Filth. Not only is the filmmaking really interesting and vibrant and it's well written, but James McAvoy is amazing in this role. He's really one of my favorite actors working today. I think he's just got like this wild range, and this role, not only does this role require a lot from him, it requires more. I don't know how to explain it. He does something in this movie. There's something that happens kind of late that just really requires a lot from him, range-wise. It's a bit surprising, but the movie overall is just a unhinged, wild, filthy, and I mean filthy ride. The movie, it comes by its name, honestly. So do not watch this movie if you were easily offended by anything. And I mean anything.
Bingo.
And then another huge name director, we've got Paul Thomas Anderson's Phantom Thread. Far from one of my favorite films of his, but this movie did not get the respect it deserves, and I think it's largely because it's very long and very slow. So you do have to go into this wanting to see a Daniel Day-Lewis performance. It's not his best, but he's gonna have a hard time topping Gangs of New York, and There Will Be Blood, if he ever pursues anything like this again. But the acting is phenomenal. The cinematography is actually pretty incredible for this movie. It's the first time Paul Thomas Anderson did the cinematography himself. And I honestly didn't love this movie for almost 2/3 of it. I appreciate his work. Again, it's well crafted. Everything's well done. But then when they get to the crux of the story and you know where it's going, man, not only was I surprised, but it's a very unique thing that the movie tries to explain. Not everybody is going to get it. I got it. I thought it was a brilliant way to wrap this movie up. The ending sequences are just so much more brilliant than I think the rest of the movie was. Had it been a little shorter, this one may have been more rewatchable for me, but as it stands, I still think this is a highly underrated movie from Anderson.
Whatever you do it carefully.
But this is Flick Connection. Y'all know I make oddball recommendations. I'm a little out there with my selections sometimes, and I do have a Michael Bay movie ranked above a Paul Thomas Anderson movie on this list, but it's easily his most underrated flick, Pain and Gain.
My name is Daniel Lugo, and I believe in fitness.
Now this is one of the only true comedy movies he's ever done. Now don't get me wrong, there's actually quite a bit of crime, there are some intense moments in this that are not funny at all, but largely this is a pretty silly movie based on a true story, even though they take a ton, and I mean a ton of liberties with it. But that's also kind of what makes this great. You know, you're not really watching this to absorb the true story. You should be watching it to absorb a bonkers Michael Bay movie with an just absolutely insane Mark Wahlberg character. The Rock is excellent in this. I always like it when he plays a dummy. Not only when he plays a dummy, but when he does a great job. Anthony Mackie's really funny in this movie as well, but the three of them play these meathead characters that end up trying to kidnap a rich guy and hold him for ransom, but they know nothing about how to do any of this.
I watched a lot of movies, Paul. I know what I'm doing.
And they completely blow it, and it is so fun to watch. It's all done in this bombastic Michael Bay style. It's totally appropriate for this story. And it also takes place in the 90s. It's just like a real lively, fun, kind of wild comedy movie that's got a fair amount of action in it as well.
You said no violence.
And I meant it when I said it, I swear to God.
I cannot kill.
Duly noted.
But next up on this list, I've got another underrated Mark Wahlberg flick that is nothing like Pain and Gain. In fact, it's one of the most serious movies Mark Wahlberg's ever done, Patriots Day. Now, this movie opens up with the Boston Marathon bombing, and then the bulk of the movie actually depicts the manhunt that ensued after that bombing. I remember when this was on the news, it was a wild story unfolding on the news over the course of a couple of days. The movie depicts it very similar to the way I recall it, and it feels authentic. And I feel like the filmmakers, Peter Berg, and really all the actors, and it's an incredible cast they got for this movie. I'm not going to name everybody. It's a really great cast. It just feels like they're all respecting the original story quite well. So it's authentic, but at the same time, it feels like a movie because that story was so wild and intense and kind of fast-paced the way it unfolded. Watching it unfold cinematically, I think is kind of a real treat. Now, I've got two absolutely incredible documentaries on this list. My next pick, my number 10 pick on this list, is probably the most heartwarming and heartbreaking documentary I think I've ever seen. But before we get to that, I do want to tell you about how today's sponsor, Factor, has been helping me stay in shape. It's no secret, I've been getting in shape over the past couple of years, and Factor has been one of my favorite tools to help me get there. And that's because they let me skip meal planning, grocery shopping, prepping, cooking, cleaning with their fresh, never frozen meals delivered directly to my door. Each week, you get to choose from up to 30 chef-crafted meals that are designed to help support a healthy lifestyle, whether that's protein plus, keto, vegan and veggie, or more wholesome options. Factor has you covered. Like I said, these meals are never frozen, they arrive fresh, they're good to keep in your fridge for a week, and they heat up in just 2 minutes. And everything I have from Factor is delicious restaurant quality food. Just yesterday, I had a black pepper and sage pork chop, which makes an amazing lunch, and like I said, it's there. I don't have to worry about going to get fast food or eating something less healthy because I've got a great option that's loaded with protein that fills my stomach up. Again, it's ready in 2 minutes. And jalapeno lime cheddar chicken is probably my favorite thing I've gotten from them so far. So if you'd like some help getting in shape or help staying in shape, use my code 50FlickConnection to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus free shipping when you go to factor75.com. That link is down in the description, but again, to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping, don't forget to use my code 50FlickConnection. It's a great deal on a product I love and enjoy, but speaking of things I love and enjoy, let's get to the top 10 movies on this list. The Remarkable Life of Ibelin is a recently released documentary that's a Netflix original. This one is, again, heartwarming and heartbreaking. This documentary is about a boy from Norway who suffered from a degenerative muscular disease, and he literally could not do anything that everyone else was doing. He couldn't, go out and meet girls, certainly couldn't go to dances, things like that. Again, I'm telling you, it's heartbreaking stuff, but the remarkable thing is he was a World of Warcraft player. And after his death, it's not a spoiler, the movie kind of opens up with talking about his death. I'm getting choked up just talking about it. His parents received countless emails, long messages from people who, man, I'm tearing up just thinking about it. Long messages from people who he changed their life. He became friends with people in World of Warcraft and literally changed the lives of a bunch of people for the better while he was confined to a chair and could barely move his head and fingers. It's a wild story to take in, and again, very, very touching on a bunch of different levels.
I don't think he was aware of how big an impact he had done to a lot of people.
But we'll go from that just really emotional roller coaster of a documentary to one of the wildest, most creative, most interesting Netflix original movies I have ever seen. And that's a bold statement coming from someone who reviews these movies for a living. It's What's Inside.
Trippy, huh?
Now, this came out just a few weeks before Halloween, and even though it's Halloween appropriate, you could watch this year-round. It's not really a horror movie. You follow a group of old friends who are having a party, actually before a wedding. Not that that's relevant, but one of them is a tech genius that shows up with this new device that allows you to switch everyone's consciousnesses, basically, kind of like a party game. And I'm not going to be able to explain how interesting this movie is. It's this sort of Christopher Nolan concept done in the style of an Edgar Wright movie. If you don't know, Edgar Wright did Scott Pilgrim and Shaun of the Dead. I mean, this one's lower budget. It's a Netflix original, kind of under the radar movie, but if you go into this one with an open mind, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. The filmmaking is very effective. I'm going to say, one, it's clever and creative, but it also helps you understand who's in whose body, and the movie is actually quite confusing, but I've watched it a couple of times. It's not nonsense. It actually works.
Right.
Yeah. No. I don't know. What the
And on top of all of that, it's actually kind of funny too. It's not an all-out comedy, but it's just a very well-balanced, again, clever Netflix original movie that feels very unique and fresh. I highly recommend this one. In fact, the only reason it's not ranked higher on this list is because I've got some bangers coming up. My next one being the oldest movie on this list is from the 80s, and it's one of my all-time favorite road movies, Midnight Run. In this movie, Robert De Niro plays a bounty hunter, and he's tasked with bringing in a white-collar criminal, played by Charles Grodin, The two of them are amazing together. This is a buddy comedy, and they are great. Not only is it a buddy comedy road movie, but there's a fair amount of action in this as well. Like I said, they're bounty hunters. There's a mob boss trying to kill Charles Grodin. There's other bounty hunters. There's the FBI. The movie's a lot of fun. Tons of just fantastic dialogue. It's one of those movies that, like, people who love it can quote it. You know, I would say that this is similar to Trains, Planes, and Automobiles. One, it comes from a similar era, and two, while it's not quite as silly, it's still just a top-notch 1980s road movie. Now, typically when I make these lists, I just comb through everything Netflix has, and I had no idea that they had House of Flying Daggers included, but they do, and it makes the list. This is from the same director as Jet Li's Hero. In fact, this is the movie he followed up Hero with, and Hero is included with Netflix right now. But House of Flying Daggers is a beautiful movie that I think just went highly underrated. I would say this is every bit as good as Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, maybe even better in the sense that it's just a little more concise. It's visually stunning. In fact, on a list of visually stunning movies, this one might be the most beautiful from shot to shot. But this came out in 2004. Obviously, it's not a Netflix original movie, so there will be no dubbed version on Netflix. This is one you will have to read subtitles for. But next up, I've got one from South Korea. I think 2 years ago, this was my favorite Netflix original movie of the year. Ballerina is a brutal action movie from South Korea. Now, there are a ton of movies kind of like Ballerina, revenge movies where a female protagonist is just whooping the shit out of a bunch of people. And those movies are fun. I like them. I'm not really trashing that genre, but Ballerina does this genre almost perfectly. I don't quite want to spoil how, but even though the main character here is a very capable fighter and can take people out, she gets overpowered more than once in this movie, and it makes sense, and it makes it more interesting that she has to retreat and regroup. That's just not something like Charlize Theron ever does in any of her action movies, you know what I mean? There are some story elements that can be a bit upsetting, but overall, the movie's got like an incredible original soundtrack, a real stunning look, and again, for like a well-worn genre, Ballerina does just everything feels fresh in it. Next up, I've got a heist comedy that I absolutely love. It's got an incredible cast, and I've been singing the praises of this movie since it came out. Luckily, Logan Lucky is slowly turning into a cult classic.
Would you give me my arm, please?
Is it this one?
This is from director Steven Soderbergh, who's most famous for the Ocean's 11 trilogy, and this is like an Ocean's 11 movie where they're trying to rob a NASCAR track. So you've got a bunch of cartoonish redneck characters, but they're not just dumb. There's a few dummies in the bunch, don't get me wrong, but Channing Tatum's character, he kind of looks like a simpleton at first, but he's very clever and puts together this entire heist. Adam Driver's really great and funny in this as well. Daniel Craig, I don't want to name everybody in the movie. They're all amazing and a lot of fun to watch. It's not a silly knee slapper, but it's funny all the way through and thoroughly entertaining. It's rated PG-13, even though there's some potty words in it. It is a crowd pleaser of a movie. If you've never seen it, this is the one I think the most people watching this video would be able to enjoy. It's such an easy movie to love.
I'm about to get naked, so no bacon. I said no bacon.
And then I promised another documentary. This next one is technically a sports documentary, but it's got the most drama I think I've ever seen in a sports story. It's titled Senna. This is based on the life and career of Ayrton Senna, a Brazilian Formula One driver who is, I think, the most legendary Formula One driver of all time. Not only is this documentary absolutely amazing, The drama on and off the track is unbelievable, and it's just a well-crafted sports documentary. The drama is so good, in fact, that they're actually releasing a live-action series based on his life and career that's going to follow a lot of the same stuff that this documentary covers, meaning the documentary could be a good primer for what I expect to be a pretty excellent series from Netflix based on his life, but it will also feature some spoilers, so, you know, it's kind of like reading the book before a movie. You decide whether you want to watch it before or after, but if you're the least bit interested in the way I've described it, you have to see this documentary. And then another sports movie that, again, you need to know nothing about it or care anything about the sport to absolutely love Cinderella Man. I mean, I'll put this up there as like Russell Crowe's most underrated movie, Ron Howard's most underrated movie. It's one of my favorite boxing movies of all time, and like I love Raging Bull, but I think Cinderella Man is a better movie about a boxer, or at least it focuses more on the boxing career. But this is based on the life of James Braddock, who was a boxer who was kind of washed up during the Great Depression. He barely could feed his family. The movie covers a lot of the Great Depression stuff very well, but he somehow musters up the strength to have one of the most incredible comebacks in sports history. The movie depicts it incredibly well. You feel all the drama. It's as good of a boxing movie as Rocky, but it's this Great Depression period piece at the same time, so it's got a lot going for it. Just like Logan Lucky, this movie is a hell of a crowd pleaser. But then another one that features a lot of brawling that is not a crowd pleaser. This is a very unique movie that I absolutely love, but listen to my description here, because again, some of you are not going to like Brawl and Cell Block 99. Now this is from director S. Craig Zahler, who did Bone Tomahawk. This is actually his follow-up to Bone Tomahawk. If you love Bone Tomahawk, you gotta see Brawl and Cell Block 99. Like, I think it's a superior movie. It is a bit slow-paced, but not in a bad way. Vince Vaughn's character that he's depicting, I think is just fantastic. It's actually really well written, and it's got an interesting flavor. Almost kind of a Tarantino thing, but it's unique unto itself. Like, his directing style has its own unique spice to it, and I love what he did with Brawl and Cell Block 99, but almost exactly at the halfway point of this movie, something snaps and it becomes a completely different type of movie. I mean, if you can be patient through that first half, the movie really rewards you with the entirety of the second half. It gets strange, it's not rooted in reality, but that's also what kind of works about this movie so well. I mean, another one that's just a real creative, clever gem of a movie that is brutal as all get out, don't get me wrong. It's got some rough moments in it, but it's also just like entertaining and one of a kind. My number one pick on this list is also one of a kind. It's my favorite sci-fi action movie that's come out in the past 10 years. It's titled Upgrade. This takes place in the near future. You follow a man who is paralyzed in a horrific set of circumstances, and he's offered a solution. He's offered this new implant named STEM that will actually allow him to move and walk again. But he quickly finds out that he can just ask STEM to take over and to do things for him, and it's a wild concept. Not only is it an interesting idea, but the way it's brought to life with action, with like fighting and things, is absolutely incredible. Logan Marshall Green is the lead here, and he's got to do two things at once. He's got to do the physical movements that the STEM chip is causing him to do, but he also has to react with his face in a way that he's not in control. He's shocked by what's happening. It's a really interesting thing to watch. And then the story goes into some wild directions. I love this movie. That's why it's my number one pick. It's the type of thing I love recommending to people who missed it. Hopefully, you got some great recommendations off of this list. Don't forget to visit Factor75.com and use my code 50FlickConnection. But I will keep making these videos as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special Netflix list, and you will see me on the next one.